Welcome to Liberty Starship, where we go beyond the typical terrestrial talk. I am Eric Alexander along with Peter Maines. Together we are your crew and invite you to join us on the journey to discuss politics and current events. Well, the first thing you might notice right off the bat is that Peter Maines is not here today. It's just me. Peter is actually involved with a local campaign, and he actually there's an election coming up that he's involved with, and it's coming up tomorrow. And so, obviously, I wish him luck. I don't want to get into too many details because I don't want to speak for Pete when he's not here on the air. But he is involved with a active campaign, and he has to work on it, so he won't be here today. It's just me. So I don't know exactly how this is going to go. I've got a couple topics to discuss because I think it's important that we're consistent and we have new material every week. So I'm going to kind of wing it on my own. This will probably end up being kind of like more of a mini-sode, and we'll go from there. So I am going to start out with a daily distraction. For those that don't know, daily distraction kind of has two meanings on this show. Sometimes I point out some of the silly media spin out there. And other times I just point out different stories that don't necessarily flow with everything else that we're going to discuss on the show. And are just kind of fun. Obviously, this show being called Liberty Starship, we do have a lot of a space theme on this show. And the thing that I wanted to share might be a little bit obvious, but I think this is a good daily distraction and a good positive way to start the show. So I've got this article here from CNN Business, and its title reads, NASA SpaceX mission, astronauts splashdown after historic mission. So for those that did not know, SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft carrying NASA astronauts Robert Becken and Douglas Hurley. I am terrible with names. I always butcher them. Apologize about that. This Crew Dragon spacecraft splashed down into the Gulf of Mexico on Sunday, marking a safe end to an historic 2-month mission, paving the way for the United States to once again become the world leader in human spaceflight. And there's a picture right there. I actually did watch this live on Twitter, on NASA's Twitter feed. This is awesome. Of course, it's really interesting when it comes to the discussion of liberty and the discussion of sort of a government-private relationship in terms of the commercialization of space, which has been going on for a very long time. Obviously, ever since the first communication satellite was put in orbit and a private company started using it, or private individuals started using it, we have had commercial space flight to some extent. But of course, we are in a new era. This, of course, is in the aftermath of actually what was set up under the Obama administration, which I think is kind of controversial among some space enthusiasts about what happened, because, of course, we've had this long gap since the end of the space shuttle program, which was a government program, but it was a government program that did involve private companies. Private companies built the space shuttle, but still it was owned by NASA, operated by NASA. In this case, with the Dragon spacecraft, these are basically vehicles that are owned by SpaceX, and NASA gets use of them almost as if a lease or a rental, like a rental car. I've kind of compared it to that. I know some people I've seen in the media compare it to a space taxi, but I say it's definitely more like a lease, like leasing a vehicle or renting a vehicle, where the private company owns it and the government just uses it. So, of course, this is a really historic day. Yesterday, in particular, because of the splashdown. We pointed out on this program earlier that we were excited about this, but hey, the mission wasn't complete, and now it is. They've gone up, they spent some time on the space station, and now they've come back down. And this is obviously a really good thing for SpaceX, a good thing for NASA, and hopefully a good thing going forward. Again, it's not without controversy, because I think some people do believe that maybe the government should have its own spacecraft, but this is definitely something that is the trend going towards the future. that we have private spacecraft that the government, like I said, simply just uses for a little while. So that's a fun story, I think. And I'm going to go straight into news briefs from here because there is a lot of news going on right now. And there's been a lot of news in the last week since the last time we were on the air. So this is some sad news that I have right now. But I wanted to acknowledge it because I do want to acknowledge the man. This is from BBC News. For those that do not know, Herman Cain, U.S. ex-presidential candidate, has died after contracting COVID. So for folks that don't know who Herman Cain was a very prominent businessman and also a Republican presidential candidate. He is someone that I personally did look up to. I didn't know a whole lot about Herman Cain, but I found a lot of when he was campaigning for the presidency in 2012. I did find a lot of what he said interesting. And I thought some dirty tricks were involved getting him out of the race. For folks that don't remember, he was accused of some sexual misconduct, which I don't know one way or another if that happened or not. I just know that it was kind of fishy in my mind because it seemed like it was politically motivated to get him out of the race. He has been a supporter of Donald Trump. There has been some speculation that possibly he contracted COVID at a Trump rally because it is known that he attended and he wasn't wearing a mask. And I know that there was some coverage that said the president believed that was not the case. But it's hard to know. One thing that's kind of sad about that whole situation is Herman Cain did have some very extensive health problems related to cancer. And I think regardless of your politics or anything like that, one thing that you have to keep in mind in these times, regardless of what you think about COVID, is if you are in a more vulnerable position because your immune system has been compromised, got to be careful. Got to be careful. My father has had COVID, different circumstance. He acquired it in a nursing home, which is a real raw subject for me, real touchy subject for me. But you have to be careful. And I wish Herman Cain's family the best. It's a very sad thing. I do think that he was a very interesting man. And like I said, I did admire some of the things that he was doing during his campaign, even though, as you can probably see from my avatar, from my little picture there, that I was not supporting him. I was supporting Dr. Ron Paul in that particular campaign. Still, I think this was someone who was admired by a lot of people. And, one thing I hope is that there hasn't been too much politics. I have seen a little bit where people were saying Herman, I should say Mr. Cain, I didn't know him personally, where people have actually kind of said, hey, he deserved it, because he's conservative, he supported Trump, he went to the rally. Yeah, that kind of stuff is crap as far as I'm concerned. There's no reason for it. And while we can definitely, wonder, and it is relevant to say, hey, where did he get it? That kind of stuff. I believe in contact tracing. Still, we have to acknowledge the fact that people are going to live their lives, and we may not agree with the way they live their lives, but they're going to do it. And people, regardless, even people that take extreme precautions, still report getting COVID-19. So, even in the best of circumstances. And I think also one thing that you have to keep in mind is the science is still out when it comes to COVID-19. It is still by definition a novel virus. And we may find information later that tells us a lot of what we were telling people was wrong. Masks is a great example of that. CDC was against masks when this program was advocating them. True story. Absolutely. We're on record as having done that. And so I just want people to realize that this is a tragic event, regardless of your politics and how you felt about him personally. Rest in peace, Herman Cain. So I'm going to move right along. I'm going to, again, try to kind of make this as, brief, I guess, as possible with the news briefs. I am just basically talking to myself unless anybody else comes on the show. that wants to make a comment or talk about something, you're welcome to. If you are watching this broadcast, feel free to chime in. Even if you want to talk about something I'm not talking about, I can try to react to it. I can even try to look up an article right on the spot if I need to. So it's just me. Again, Pete is actively working on a campaign. So unfortunately, he's not going to be here. But I do have something to share from Pete. And I'm going to get to that in a little bit because I wanted to first kind of segue into it with another interesting article that came out that I found from Police One. For folks that don't know, I use Police One quite a bit to get information, especially in these times of where people are talking a lot about police reform. And I use Police One a lot because a lot of police officers use this to get information. A lot of police administrators use this to get information. And Police One doesn't just do their own articles. They actually collate articles from other news sources like this one, like this headline we have here from today. And the headline reads, Seattle City Council proposes police layoffs, but can't defund by 50% yet, members say. Council members say bargaining with the Seattle Police Officers Guild will delay layoffs until November. And this is a Seattle Times article that has been reprinted, shared on Police One. So this is kind of interesting because when it comes to the issue of police reform, and we hear these things like defund the police, this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. This is where we see people trying to make concrete plans. And, well, you know about plans, right? The best laid plans of mice and men. Sometimes it doesn't really work out that way. There's a lot of rhetoric out there and not a lot of good planning. So this particular article does mention that most of the proposals are aimed at cuts for the SWAT team, their encampment removal team, their mounted unit. It says they're getting rid of their mountain unit, apparently. So basically, next year, they're looking at more dramatic changes to create a new Department of Community Safety that could pave the way for sweeping changes in response to the Black Lives Matter protests that have surged throughout the city. So this is where your concrete plan is, Department of Community Safety. What that's going to look like, who the heck knows? But this article it's interesting to note that a lot of these city council people basically had committed to this idea of cutting the police department by 50%. And what's happened is a lot of these other council members have said that's a terrible idea. Well, actually, I should paraphrase. You're kind of saying it's a great idea, but we have no idea how to do this in a safe manner. And that's the problem with this kind of rhetoric. I'll just go on record as saying I think this is a terrible idea. I do think that there are a lot of issues, a lot of situations that police respond to that they don't really need to be responding, but there's a reason why they do. There's a reason why they do, and people sometimes forget the reason. And one of the big reasons is, to be quite honest, most other agencies and people in general don't want to deal with it. I was a police officer for 20 years, and I can tell you the fact of the matter is a lot of the things that you might think, well, why do you need a police officer for that? It's because nobody else wants to deal with it. That's the bottom line. And Seattle is going to find this out quickly. Actually, Seattle already knows it. Every major city already knows it. Most communities already know it. There's tons of things that happen that normal people just don't want to deal with. That's the bottom line. And that's why the police has to pick up the slack. And I could give you, all sorts of things that they're talking about. People talk about mental health. People talk about drug and substance abuse issues, which, by the way, that's kind of, especially, talking in the Liberty Forum, that's one of those issues that, it's really like on the edge because let's face it, drugs are illegal in most communities, and even legal drugs, for instance, like we could talk about alcohol. Alcohol is a legal drug, but there's often situations where people are consuming alcohol and they commit crimes, whether we're talking about DUIs or we're talking about disorderly conduct or even public intoxication, which incidentally, I live in Arizona. There is no public intoxication in Arizona, but in many places that exists. So the question becomes, all right, well, this person is breaking a law, do you really want to send a social worker or a counselor to deal with this person? And how are they supposed to deal with this person? I think that there's really not a lot of thought put into this stuff. I think a lot of it is rhetoric, and I think a lot of it is deliberately meant to destabilize. And a lot of these people that are trying to make these decisions right now have no idea what they're talking about. And I mean no idea what they're talking about, because they don't have a solution. They don't have an alternative. And I'm just telling you, realistically, people don't want to deal with it. The fire department doesn't want to deal with it. Social workers don't want to deal with it. I can tell you time after time dealing with social workers that didn't want to deal with the situation. We'd call them, try to turn the situation over to them, and they didn't want to come. I'm talking about adult protective services. I'm talking about child protective services. Those kind of organizations that are supposed to deal with this stuff. Probation officers, parole officers don't want to deal with it, and end up throwing this stuff on the police. There are existing agencies, all sorts of existing agencies that could be doing a lot of these things that some people are saying the police shouldn't be doing. And I would agree with them. But the fact of the matter is they don't want to do it. And that's an unfortunate thing that we're not hearing, is that police officers don't have a lot of love for doing a lot of these things that don't directly involve serious crimes. It's absolutely true. Police officers would much rather be involved with things that are actual real crimes. But, it is what it is. It's the way society is. Now, I was mentioning that Pete does have a sort of presence that I wanted to acknowledge on the show today, even though he's not here to actually talk. I wanted to congratulate my partner, and hopefully I'll be able next week to congratulate him actually on the air about this article that he recently had published on the Libertarian Republic. This is really cool. So he actually had an article published on the Libertarian Republic, and the article is called "We Don't Have to Choose Between Fascism or Communism," which is a really good, awesome title right there. We actually did talk about this last week. Pete and I did. About this idea of this is all based on what was going on in Portland, and we did actually get a little bit heated because Pete and I have some different ideas when it comes to what was going on in Portland. But this is a really interesting article. I definitely advise you to take a look at it. Pete makes some amazingly good arguments about the situation that was going on in Portland. For those that don't know, we're talking about federal officers that were in sort of military garb, in unmarked vehicles that were making arrests on the street, and the controversy that caused. And of course, right now, as things stand, they basically decided to withdraw the Homeland Security federal officers and turn it back over to the state. Over in Oregon, in Portland specifically. And anyway, as I mentioned, Pete makes a lot of good points in this article. I really advise you to take a look at it. Right off the bat, you can see in the first paragraph, federal agents dressed in military garb are firing tear gas and flashbangs while arresting protesters and rioters in Portland, Oregon. If this were Obama's America, the right would be outraged. In Trump's America, the "Don't Tread on Me" crowd says, yeah, serves him right. And that's a great point right there off the bat, is that sort of contrast of, hey, when our guy is in charge, we're okay with tactics that we would not be okay with if our guy was not in charge. And by the way, both sides are really guilty of this. There's just no doubt about this. It gets very political. And he makes a lot of great points here, but that just starting right off the bat, he really kind of shows where he's coming from. And like I said, there's actually a lot in this article I don't agree with, but it's really well crafted. Pete's arguments are really good. So I definitely encourage people to check that out, and wanted to give Pete that shout out and congratulations, even though he couldn't come on the show today, because again, he is involved in an active campaign, which is also very cool. Now, speaking of active campaigns, The main topic that I wanted to talk about today is actually local elections. I wanted to talk about election 2020, sort of local edition, because we're going to be talking a lot, I'm sure, about the presidential election as it goes on. There's more and more information coming out every day when it concerns the presidential election. But here in Arizona, where I'm based, we actually have a primary election that's happening tomorrow. And in Arizona, we do have vote by mail as well. So thousands of people have probably already voted in this primary election. Well, you hope anyway. Primary elections can be a little bit weird as far as, when they don't directly deal with the primary elections can be weird. I'll just put it that way. That's especially right now, because we don't have it's not like right now somebody is challenging Trump significantly, or somebody is even challenging Biden significantly, where you're going to get a big, huge voter turnout because people want to vote for the presidential primary. You don't have that big push right now. That's just not what's going on. So what is going on is a lot of local elections. And one of the things that I've been trying to advocate, and I want to kind of be the change I'm asking for, is folks really need to be more involved in their local politics and their local elections. I live in Arizona. I specifically live in Scottsdale, Arizona. I thought I would talk about what's going on here in Scottsdale. So one of the things we've talked about before, and it's probably casting quite a shadow over politics here in this city and even in the state, is there was a protest by one of our city councilmen where basically Councilman Guy Adams from Scottsdale had a mask protest. I actually wanted to cover that, and I wasn't able to because that's actually in my neighborhood. I live very close to where that protest occurred in Old Town Scottsdale, which is the downtown area of Scottsdale. And there was a lot of controversy about that because of comments that Guy Phillips made, where he was wearing a mask. He took it off and he said, I can't breathe in this thing, words to that extent. And it really took he was outside. Had he been inside, I think it would have taken the air out of the room quite a bit. And they talked about that. They talked about that quite a bit in Scottsdale. Specifically, they did have a online forum. I'll share the link right over here. Or I should share the image here. This is from the Scottsdale Area Chamber of Commerce. It says, young voters led the way as they take charge of a unique mayoral candidate forum. And so this was basically done online, sort of like a sort of debate for mayoral candidates, although they called it a forum, and calling it a forum is accurate because it wasn't really a debate. There wasn't a whole lot of interaction between the candidates themselves. They basically had 4 people on the forum who were asking questions. Well, I should say 3 people asking questions primarily, and 1 person being a moderator who also asked a couple questions. And it was interesting. It was interesting for me as someone who lives in Scottsdale, interesting for me to see what they were talking about. I thought it was actually a good discussion, but I was, I shouldn't say a little upset. I was quite upset, actually, because, upset and disappointed because they didn't hit 2 of the big issues. They addressed Guy Adams, and most of the candidates basically said that they were, condemning what he said. They weren't really defending him in any way, except for Lisa Borkowski. She did provide at least a little bit of defense in basically kind of saying, hey, I don't know, Councilman Phillips, but I've heard that he's a good guy, and he made a mistake, and he's apologized, and hey, just let the voters decide, which was kind of in contrast to Cordy, and if I'm pronouncing her wrong, Virginia Cordy, I apologize, but she was talking about this idea of some sort of censure. It was kind of obvious, like she was saying that if the city council could, they should expel him for remarks that he made. And I I have a big problem with that. I have a really big problem with that. She admitted that the city council can't do that. They don't have the power in Scottsdale to expel one of their members for saying something, which, by the way, I do think that's deplorable. And she really upset me a little bit in the fact that she was implying that if she had the power, she would throw him out for saying something she doesn't like. One of the things that really upset me was they talked about the councilman, but they didn't talk about the issue of masks. And the issue of masks is really relevant, particularly in this context. And this is in so many other cities as well, because in Scottsdale we had this situation where the mayor decided to make an emergency declaration requiring masks without consultation of the city council. And to me, that's a no-brainer question to be asking the Scottsdale mayoral candidates. Hey, what do you think of this? Are you for this ordinance? And also, it should be a two-part question, because it's not just about being whether you're for mandatory masks or not. It's about the process. I've been trying to talk about this quite a bit. It's about the process, and the process was wrong because the mayor shouldn't be making this call alone. This is something that the city council should have met on and decided one way or the other, not the mayor unilaterally by himself. There's no need for that. There's no need for that. We're into this thing months now as far as COVID is concerned, and there's just no reason why the city council couldn't meet and talk about this. In Phoenix, they did. I give credit to Phoenix, even though I am not for mandatory masks for the general population. I'm just not. I mean, mandatory is what I'm trying to say. I do advocate the wearing of masks, but I don't believe it should be mandatory for the general public. I think that's overreach. That's going too far. I would be more comfortable with saying that, employees in places like restaurants, grocery stores, things like that, which are, by the way, there's regulations. There's quite a bit of regulations when it comes to food handling and things like that, licensing requirements, all those kinds of things, where you have a lot more leeway, a lot more leverage over people that are involved with public businesses and things like that. There's more leeway, I think, and more cause where you can say, okay, well, we definitely can say something. If we can require people to wear gloves while they're handling food or something like that, then we can require them to wear a mask. I compare it also to the idea of sort of even like a dress code or something like that. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but requiring people just who are customers who are going in to get something to eat or something like that, requiring people on the street because they're congregating in large groups or something like that. I don't know. That's where I think that you've gone too far. But I was really disappointed they didn't just take that issue on directly. They talked about Guy Phillips and their issues with him, but they wouldn't directly. It wasn't even asked. I'm really disappointed that the question wasn't even asked, and nobody wanted to take it up, unilaterally and say, hey, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this issue that the mayor went ahead and decided to do mandatory masks without consultation of the city council. That to me is a no-brainer. And even worse, actually, is, we had riots in Scottsdale, and like many other communities have had riots. We had riots in Scottsdale, and they didn't talk about that at all. Not even indirectly. In fact, there was almost no talk about public safety in this time when we're talking about police reform and all these other kind of issues. They were willing. Many of the candidates were willing to express their outrage and disappointment at Councilman Phillips, but they weren't willing to talk about their outrage over the fact that we allowed riots to occur in Scottsdale. Really disappointed me. That nobody was willing to talk about that. So I can tell you from my perspective, I can't do. Well, I can't say I can't. I mean, I could do a formal endorsement, but it doesn't really matter. From the perspective of where my forum is at this point, and I'm just talking to myself at this point. But the way that I feel is, I think Burkowski was the one that impressed me the most, as far as kind of coming from the perspective of, I think, more of a libertarian mindset of being pro-business, get the government out of the way. She still has some progressive attitudes. She's not 100%, libertarian by any means. She still has some progressive attitudes, which aren't necessarily bad. Not all progressive attitudes are bad. And so, I was kind of impressed with Lisa Murkowski. That's probably who I'm going to vote for tomorrow. Our election is tomorrow. I probably will vote for Guy Phillips, because I do believe that he had every right to question the mask ordinance. I think his comments were poorly chosen. That there was a poor way to express his frustration. There's the accusations that it was staged, and then there are people that say that it was just sort of a spontaneous comment that was just badly worded. And to the credit of Councilman Phillips, he did actually apologize for what he said. I know he apologized for that. So, I thought I would talk just a little bit about the local politics here in Scottsdale. Again, I think it's really important that people get involved in their local politics, find these kind of forums. I think it's very common that your local Chamber of Commerce is going to be the place where they provide these forums. It's unfortunate with COVID that we don't have these forums in person that you can attend, where people can ask questions. It would have been nice if this was live, and they would have taken questions from like the chat. If this was like a live broadcast, like what I'm doing right now, I have a chat option here. And it would be nice if they had done something like this with both the mayoral candidates and also the city councilmen, those who are running for city council in Scottsdale, so that people could ask questions, because I would have asked about the masks right away. And I would have asked about public safety and the riots. I would have asked about the police chief of Scottsdale, who I think really put himself in a bad light for a lot of reasons. I think about the fact that he actually marched with the protesters after the riots, after we had riots in Scottsdale, and he allowed riots to happen in Scottsdale. He marched with the Black Lives Matters protesters, and the person he marched with contracted COVID. And we don't know when she contracted COVID, and the police chief was walking with her without a mask on. And things like that just put a terrible taste in my mouth, because basically the chief essentially exposed his entire department to COVID, potentially, depending on when the protest organizer actually became infected. But he potentially exposed his entire department, because the police chief, basically, because he meets with everybody, would spread it to the rest of the department quite easily if he had it. As far as I know, he doesn't. I'm just saying that he put himself and his department in a bad situation, and I think his response to the riots was terrible. And it's something that needs to be called out, and it's something that they should have been addressing. But they didn't talk about that at all. So that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And that's why it's important to get involved with local politics, so you can provide your own forum and get those kind of questions answered. So I think that's going to be it for me. Basically, I kind of wanted to just do a mini-sode to basically make sure that we did have some new content out here. I do want to congratulate Pete again for getting that article published. It's a great article. Please, everybody, go check it out. And I guess talking for Peter Maines, since he's not here, hey, you all keep flying free.